Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the MakerPipe Masterclass. This is a series where we're walking you through the complete process of building a DIY project with EMT conduit and clamps from MakerPipe.com. In the first few episodes, we've covered just about everything you need to know about those two materials. We've talked about where you can find them, how to use the tools that you need for building, and we've highlighted the different features that make them accessible and approachable for building just about anything you can imagine. I hope by now you're getting excited about the idea of building your project and solving your problems with the help of conduit and clamps. The next step to making that happen is to design and plan your project, which is exactly what we're going to cover in today's episode. We're going to walk through the process of sketching and modeling a build and then create a connector and cut list. This part is really fun because you get to problem solve and envision what your project is going to be like when it's finished. This is the first major step in making your project into something real. I've been wanting to build a small rolling workbench for a while, and now is a great time to do it because conduit and connectors are the perfect materials to help make it happen quickly and affordably. This is optional, but before you start planning your project, it can be a good idea to see some examples of similar builds that have been built by others. You can do this by checking out the MakerPipe Build Gallery or spending some time in the community section of the website. Our YouTube channel is also a great place to get some inspiration for your builds. With that said, let's dive in and plan a project. The key to planning any sort of build is to first get it out of your head and turn it into a visual that you can use for planning and designing. This can be done in a number of ways. A lot of builders start with a line drawing on paper, which is a simple and easy way to get going. At this stage, don't worry too much about connectors or accessories and where they might go. You really just want to take the visual of what you want your finished build to look like and turn it into a simple line drawing with basic shapes like rectangles, triangles, and so on. It really helps if your basic drawing is three-dimensional. For my workbench, this is going to be pretty straightforward. I want my workbench to have 4 vertical legs. There's going to be a work surface on top, so we need to support that somehow. I think I want the worktop to overhang the framework. Because of this, I'm going to add a rung around the top of the frame, which will help to support the work surface. Now I could stop here and have a decent framework for a workbench, but I want to make sure this can support some heavier things on top and be solid. Adding some lower supports to the legs will help a lot with the lateral stability of the frame. We don't want it to wobble or be shaky, especially with materials and tools on top. A good way to eliminate this from just about any build is to add some horizontal braces between the legs. This will help a lot with the overall stability of the frame. I also expect to have some heavy things on top of this workbench sometimes, and I don't want the frame to flex or bend in the middle, so I want to add a couple of angled supports that will help transfer the weight down to the sides. This should help take some of the stress off of the top rung. We're pretty much done, but I need to add one more thing. One of the best parts about DIY projects is the fact that you can customize them for your own specific needs and interests. As you can imagine, I tend to build a lot with conduit and connectors, and I misplace my tools and hardware pretty regularly. On the back of this workbench, I want to add some pegboard which will allow me to hang up my hand tools and also add some storage bins for loose hardware and other things. Now I'd say we've got a pretty good design which will allow us to start planning things out in more detail. This includes figuring out our dimensions as well as a list of connectors and materials. Before we jump into that, I want to briefly mention that sometime during this stage of the planning process, you will likely wonder which conduit size to utilize in your specific build. If you're unsure, I recommend checking out the resources that I mentioned earlier so that you can see builds and the different sizes in action for real-world expectations. More often than not, we see builders choose 3/4 inch EMT because it provides a fantastic balance between strength and value for builds. That's what I'm going to use for my workbench. There are a lot of connector options on the website, and they allow you to do different things within your projects. We have a full walkthrough of the MakerPipe system that I'll link down below so that you can get familiar with the different connectors that are available. You can also refer to the product pages on the website to see pictures of each connector, which is helpful as well. Either option will go a long way when it comes to helping you choose the right ones for your build. I typically figure out which connectors I need in one of two ways. The first is to simply look at your drawing and circle anywhere that you have a connection point between your lines. This is typically where you're going to have a connection point in your final build as well. For example, look closely at the corners of my workbench. We can see that there are 3 lines being joined together. 1 in the middle and then 2 that come out at an angle to make the corner. From there, I'll go to the website and see which connector would allow me to join 3 pieces of conduit together to create a corner like this. There's only a few options that let me join 3 pieces of conduit together, and only one of them creates a 90-degree corner like the one I need. That would be the 90-degree connector as you can see here. Next, what I like to do is go through the sketch and look for any other places that could utilize the same connector. In my case, that would be all of these corner connections. That means I'm going to need 8 of the 90-degree connectors in total. It's pretty common that this happens when planning builds. You'll often figure out one connection and then realize that you'll use the same connector a few times in your project. In fact, I'll be able to build my entire workbench with a 90-degree connector and one more connector type that we're about to look at. We can see that there are quite a few places where 2 lines are connected together like this. If I look at the website and see which connectors would allow me to join two pieces of conduit in this way, there's really only one that makes sense. That would be the T-connector. I can use it for the angled braces, for the crossbar that supports those braces, and for the two horizontal bars on the back of the frame here that will support the pegboard. I will need 10 T-connectors in total for all of these connections that we just circled. It might be surprising to see that I can make my whole workbench with just these two connector types, but a lot of the times the core components that I mentioned in the previous episode will make up a lot of your frames. Another way that you can prototype and plan out the connectors in your build is with the MakerPipe Mini connectors. They are 3D printed miniature versions of the full-size MakerPipe connectors. We designed them to connect with coffee stirrers in a way that replicates the process of building with EMT conduit. They're extremely cost-effective for project planning and can be found at MakerPipe.com. They allow you to figure out which connectors you need pretty easily. You might even find it helpful to model your project and see a tangible version of your framework, even if you've already sketched your build and found the connector list before now. Modeling with the minis is also helpful because you'll basically be practicing the assembly of your full-size conduit build. That's what I'll be doing here with my model. I'm going to use some of the miniature 90-degree connectors and T-connectors to model out my workbench. Now, as I said, these are meant to replicate the full-scale connectors and conduit, so this is going to be a pretty accurate representation of my final project. And just like that, I have my miniature model of my build. Now we can move on to figuring out our cut and material list for our project. Oftentimes, you will likely be building within a confined space, or you might be incorporating materials such as wood in your build and have constraints for the dimensions that you're working with. That's how it is for me. I like to use these project boards from Lowe's whenever I can. They are pre-cut and cheap enough that I can replace them if they get damaged over time. The one that I'm using for this workbench is 2 foot by 4 foot and 3/4 inch thick. I'm going to work within these dimensions to figure out the measurements of my conduit framework. We have a separate video dedicated to creating cut lists that I'll link down below. For now, I'll just mention some of the highlights as I create mine. I also mentioned this in the last episode, but the most important thing to know is that the orientation of the connectors will affect the overall measurements and cuts in your build. Sometimes a connector may add length to the conduit or replace sections of your frame. This is crucial to keep in mind so that you get correct measurements the first time. This is another reason why the mini model is helpful. You can see the difference in the connections within your frame and plan your cut list accordingly. For example, if we look at the 90-degree corner connections in my mini model, we can see that the vertical legs are running continuously through the 90-degree connectors. The front two legs will stop and sit flush with the top of the connector so that the workbench can sit directly on top. The back two pieces of conduit are going to extend up a couple of feet so that they can support the pegboard. Since the legs are running continuously through the connectors, we don't have to worry about them adding length to our conduit, so I can just set my vertical height at 40 inches for the front two legs. Something I do have to account for is the casters that I want to add to the bottom to allow the workbench to roll. These add 4 inches to the height, so I will need to subtract that from my 40-inch measurement. This means my two front verticals will be 36 inches tall. For the back verticals, I need to make sure to accommodate for the pegboard. Usually in a project like this, I might just leave the vertical legs pretty tall until I had the pegboard in place and can figure it out in the moment. For the sake of this video, I will be a little bit more detailed. I've been wanting to try out these metal pegboards for a while, so I'm going to pick them up for this build. They are 36 inches tall, so I want to make sure to add that to my length from before. I will add a few extra inches that I can cut off once I get the pegboard installed. Let's just call it 80 inches for now for the back legs. The other two pieces of conduit that connect in the 90s are the ones that you have to watch out for when making your cut list. They stop inside the connector, which then means there's going to be some added length that we have to account for. I'll put a reference guide in the description so you can see what these different measurements are for the different connectors and the different sizes. In my case, the 90-degree connector for 3/4 inch EMT conduit will add 2 inches to the length. Since I have one on each side, I will need to subtract 4 inches from my horizontal width. I also want the workbench to overhang about 1 inch on both sides, so I'll need to subtract another 2 inches to accommodate for that. So to get my desired width, I will need to cut the piece of conduit down to 42 inches. Earlier when we were looking at connectors, I mentioned that you're likely to use the same connector type in several different spots in your build. It's very similar when you're creating a cut list. That measurement that we just found will be the same for all 6 other pieces of conduit that make up the width. Similarly, these 5 pieces of conduit that run front to back are all going to be the same length, so we just need to figure out one of them. We already know that the 90s add 2 inches of length, and again, we have 2 of them in this span, so we need to subtract 4 total inches from the length. One thing that is different on these is the fact that the rear vertical legs are going to extend up, so that work surface is going to butt up against it. This will cause the front lip to extend over the frame by about 1 inch or so, which means I don't have to worry about calculating the overhang this time around. With that, I've got the measurement of these 5 pieces of conduit, which will be 20 inches. Lastly, we need to figure out the length of these 2 angled braces. For angled braces in projects, I don't usually calculate them in my cut list because we'd have to do a lot of math and figure them out, which is a pain. When we build a project, I'll show you a trick that makes it really easy to figure them out. For now, it's safe to assume that one extra stick of conduit will be enough for them, so I'm going to add that to my list. Speaking of which, now that we have all of our measurements, we can add them up and figure out how many 10-foot sticks of conduit that we need to get from the hardware or home improvement store. For me, that comes out to roughly 5.9 sticks of conduit. I'm just going to round that up to 6 and get that from the store. Now we are getting really close to the fun part of the process, which is putting it all together. Before we can do that, we will need to order our connectors and supplies from MakerPipe, and then order or pick up the rest of our materials and accessories as well. Before you place your MakerPipe order, it's a good idea to go ahead and think about the hacks or custom solutions and accessories in your projects. Some of them can be found on the MakerPipe website, which means you can order a lot of stuff at once to avoid multiple orders and shipping fees. I mentioned the tabletop from Lowe's that I'm using already, so that is covered, but I'm going to need to secure that to my framework somehow. After exploring my options, I'm going to use electrical one-hole straps. They come in a pack of 4, so I'll order 1 pack. Remember how I said I wanted the workbench to be able to roll? There's a few more things like casters and end caps that I can go ahead and order as well. If you don't have tools to build, then you may want to pick those up now too. I don't entirely know if this is going to work how I want, but I'm also going to order some threaded pipe inserts and hanger straps. I think those will come in handy when mounting the pegboard. This is a good time to mention that you're likely going to need some hacks or creative solutions to get your build just right. Here on the channel and in the community, you can see a lot of creative solutions to problems that other builders have come up with and used in their builds. If you can't find a solution or hack for your specific problem, then feel free to reach out and we will do our best to help. Now with everything added to my cart, I can go through the checkout process and place my order. We ship out orders every weekday and do our best to get them out ASAP. You'll receive your tracking number through email once it ships so you can follow along. While you're waiting on your MakerPipe package, you can head on over to your local hardware or home improvement store to pick up your EMT conduit and other items that you need. In the coming episodes, we will unbox our MakerPipe connectors and accessories and start the fun part of actually building our project. I hope you guys are finding this series helpful and are getting some confidence to build your own DIY projects with EMT conduit and clamps. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us or leave a comment below. We will do our best to help. Like and subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes in the series. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.